Have you ever felt like you're living in a world that just doesn't get you? Like you're speaking a different language, even when you're using the same words as everyone else? Well, if you're an INFJ, you're not alone in feeling this way. Today, we're diving deep into something that affects millions of people worldwide, the harsh reality of how society judges one of the rarest personality types on the planet. I'm talking about INFJs, those mysterious souls who make up less than 2% of the population. They're often called the advocates or the counselors, but here's what society really thinks about them. And trust me, it's not always pretty. So buckle up, because we're about to uncover the raw, unfiltered truth about how the world sees INFJs. Whether you're an INFJ yourself, know someone who is, or you're just curious about personality types, this video's gonna open your eyes to some uncomfortable realities. 1. The too sensitive label that haunts every INFJ. Let's start with the big one, the label that follows INFJs everywhere they go. You're too sensitive. Sound familiar? If you're an INFJ, you've probably heard this phrase more times than you can count. And honestly, it's become society's go-to explanation for why INFJs react differently to things. But here's the thing, what society calls too sensitive is actually an INFJ's superpower. These folks don't just feel emotions, they absorb them like a sponge. They pick up on subtle changes in people's moods, they notice when something's off before anyone else does, and they can sense tension in a room from a mile away. Yet instead of recognizing this as an incredible ability, society often treats it like a character flaw. People roll their eyes when an INFJ gets upset about something that seems minor. They dismiss their concerns as overreactions. They tell them to toughen up or grow thicker skin. What's really happening here is a fundamental misunderstanding. INFJs aren't choosing to be sensitive, they're wired that way. Their brains process emotional information differently. They're what researchers call highly sensitive persons, and that's not a bug, it's a feature. But society doesn't see it that way. Instead, we live in a world that values emotional toughness over emotional intelligence. We praise people who can brush things off, who don't let things get to them. And that puts INFJs at a serious disadvantage in the court of public opinion. The irony is that this same sensitivity that society judges so harshly is exactly what makes INFJs such incredible friends, partners, and colleagues. They're the ones who notice when you're having a bad day before you even say anything. They're the ones who remember the little things that matter to you. They're the ones who can offer comfort in ways that feel truly meaningful. 2. Society's obsession with extroversion leaves INFJs behind. Here's another harsh reality. We live in what psychologists call an extrovert's world. From the moment we're kids, society rewards the loud ones, the outgoing ones, the ones who speak up first in class. And that creates a real problem for INFJs, who tend to be more introverted and thoughtful in their approach to life. Think about it. In school, participation grades often favor kids who speak up frequently, even if what they're saying isn't particularly insightful. In the workplace, the people who get promoted are often the ones who are most visible, most vocal, most willing to put themselves out there. And in social situations, the life of the party gets all the attention while the thoughtful observer in the corner gets labeled as antisocial or weird. INFJs don't operate this way. They're processors. They need time to think through their thoughts before sharing them. When they do speak up, it's usually because they have something meaningful to contribute. But by the time they've processed their thoughts, the conversation has often moved on. This creates a vicious cycle. INFJs get judged for being quiet, which makes them even more hesitant to speak up, which leads to more judgment. Society interprets their thoughtfulness as lack of confidence or social awkwardness. Their preference for deep, meaningful conversations gets labeled as intense or heavy. What's particularly frustrating is that INFJs often have incredible insights to offer. They're natural counselors and advisors. They see patterns that others miss. They understand human nature in ways that can be almost uncanny. But because they don't package these insights in loud, attention-grabbing ways, they often get overlooked. The business world is especially brutal in this regard. INFJs might have amazing ideas, but if they're not comfortable with self-promotion or office politics, their contributions can go unnoticed. They prefer to let their work speak for itself, but in a world where visibility often trumps quality, that approach can backfire. 3. The weird factor. When being different becomes a target? Let's be honest, INFJs are different. They think differently, they feel differently, they approach life differently. And unfortunately, different often gets translated as weird in society's mind. INFJs have this unique way of seeing the world that can be hard for others to understand. They notice things that other people miss. They make connections that seem random to others. They have insights that can feel almost prophetic. And when you can't explain where these insights come from, people start to think you're strange. I've heard countless INFJs describe experiences where they've had strong intuitions about people or situations, only to be dismissed as paranoid or overthinking things. Then weeks or months later, their intuitions prove to be spot on. But instead of gaining respect for their insights, they often face even more suspicion. "How did you know that?" becomes less of a compliment and more of an accusation. The truth is, INFJs have incredibly strong intuitive abilities. They pick up on subtle cues that others miss. They can read between the lines in ways that seem almost magical to people who don't have this ability. But because they can't always explain their process, society tends to dismiss their insights as lucky guesses or overthinking. This weird label follows INFJs throughout their lives. In school, they're the kids who ask unusual questions or have unique perspectives on things. In the workplace, they're the ones who approach problems from angles that others haven't considered. In social situations, they're the ones who want to talk about meaningful topics while everyone else is making small talk. And here's what's really unfair. Society benefits tremendously from these weird qualities. INFJs become therapists, counselors, social workers, writers, and artists. They create the books we love, the movies that move us, the music that speaks to our souls. They're often the ones working behind the scenes to make the world a better place. But they rarely get credit for their contributions because their methods don't fit society's expectations of how things should be done. 4. The perfectionism trap. When high standards meet harsh judgment. INFJs are natural perfectionists, and society has some pretty strong opinions about that. On one hand, perfectionism is often praised as a positive trait. We admire people who have high standards and who refuse to settle for mediocrity. But when it comes to INFJs, their perfectionism often gets twisted into something negative. Society tends to judge INFJ perfectionism in two main ways, and neither one is fair. First, they're labeled as too picky or impossible to please. When an INFJ has high standards for themselves and others, people interpret this as being judgmental or difficult to work with. Second, when INFJs struggle with perfectionism, when they procrastinate because they're afraid their work won't be good enough, or when they get overwhelmed by their own high expectations, society labels them as anxious or neurotic. But here's what society misses. INFJ perfectionism isn't about being better than other people. It's about living up to their own internal compass. INFJs have incredibly strong values, and they feel genuine distress when they can't live up to those values, whether in their personal lives or their work. This perfectionism also extends to how they treat others. INFJs often hold themselves and others to high ethical standards. They believe in doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. They can't understand why someone would take shortcuts or compromise their integrity for personal gain. And when they express these values, society often sees them as self-righteous or holier than thou. The reality is that INFJ perfectionism comes from a place of genuine care. They want to make a positive impact on the world. They want their work to mean something. They want their relationships to be authentic and meaningful. But society often interprets these noble intentions as impossible standards or unrealistic expectations. What's particularly frustrating is that society benefits from INFJ perfectionism. They're the ones who catch errors that others miss. They're the ones who refuse to cut corners when safety or ethics are at stake. They're the ones who push for better solutions instead of settling for good enough. But instead of being appreciated for these qualities, they often get criticized for being too demanding or too intense. 5. Misunderstood motivations. When good intentions get twisted. One of the most painful aspects of being judged by society as an INFJ is having your motivations constantly misunderstood. INFJs are driven by a deep desire to help others and make the world a better place. But society often interprets their actions through a much more cynical lens. When an INFJ goes out of their way to help someone, people sometimes assume they have ulterior motives. What do they want in return becomes the automatic question. The idea that someone might genuinely want to help without expecting anything back seems foreign to many people. This skepticism can be incredibly hurtful for INFJs, who are often giving from a place of genuine care and concern. They're not keeping score. They're not looking for recognition or rewards. They simply see a need and want to fill it. But society has become so accustomed to transactional relationships that genuine altruism gets viewed with suspicion. INFJs also face judgment when they set boundaries or say no to requests for help. Because they're known for being helpful and accommodating, people expect them to always be available. When an INFJ finally reaches their limit and needs to step back, they're often accused of being selfish or uncaring. It's a no-win situation. If they help too much, their motivations are questioned. If they don't help enough, they're criticized for not living up to expectations. Society seems to have created an impossible standard for INFJs where they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. The truth is, INFJs need to learn to protect their energy and set healthy boundaries, just like anyone else. But because they're natural givers, society expects them to be endlessly available. When they finally assert their needs, it comes as a shock to people who have grown accustomed to taking their helpfulness for granted. 6. The overthinking accusation that dismisses deep thought. If there's one criticism that every INFJ has heard, it's that they overthink everything. And honestly, this accusation reveals more about society's discomfort with deep thought than it does about INFJs themselves. INFJs are natural processors. They don't just accept things at face value. They dig deeper. They ask why, when others are content with what. They consider multiple angles, explore different possibilities, and think through the long-term implications of decisions. And somehow, society has decided that this thorough approach to thinking is a problem. The overthinking label gets thrown around whenever an INFJ takes time to process information, asks probing questions, or expresses concerns about potential consequences. It's become a way to shut down deeper analysis and force quick, surface-level decisions. But here's the thing, what society calls overthinking often prevents serious problems down the road. INFJs are the ones who spot potential issues before they become crises. They're the ones who think through the human impact of decisions, not just the bottom line. They're the ones who consider how choices will affect everyone involved, not just the decision makers. Yet instead of being valued for this thorough approach, they're often pressured to just make a decision already or stop overcomplicating things. The fast-paced nature of modern society has created an environment where quick decisions are valued over good decisions, and that puts INFJs at a serious disadvantage. What's particularly ironic is that many of the world's biggest problems could be avoided if more people engaged in the kind of deep thinking that comes naturally to INFJs. Environmental disasters, financial crises, social injustices, these issues often develop because people make short-term decisions without considering long-term consequences. INFJs aren't overthinking, they're thinking appropriately for the complexity of the world we live in. But society's impatience with this process means they're constantly being pushed to speed up their natural rhythm, often to everyone's detriment. 7. Social expectations versus INFJ reality, the constant struggle. Society has very specific expectations about how people should behave in social situations, and these expectations often clash directly with INFJ nature. From small talk at parties to networking events to casual workplace interactions, INFJs are constantly being judged for not fitting into society's social mold. Take small talk, for example. Society expects people to engage in light, surface-level conversations about weather, sports, or celebrity gossip. But for INFJs, small talk can feel almost physically painful. They crave deeper connections and meaningful conversations. When they try to steer conversations toward more substantial topics, they're often labeled as too serious or intense. But the alternative, forcing themselves to engage in small talk they find meaningless, feels inauthentic and draining. It's like asking a fish to climb a tree and then judging it for not being good at climbing. Networking events are another social nightmare for many INFJs. The whole concept of building relationships for professional gain goes against their values of authentic connection. They can't just walk up to strangers and start promoting themselves. They need time to build trust and genuine rapport with people. Yet in professional settings, this preference for authentic relationship building gets interpreted as poor networking skills or lack of ambition. INFJs are often passed over for opportunities not because they lack qualifications, but because they don't play the social game according to society's rules. Even in friendships, INFJs face judgment for their social preferences. They prefer smaller gatherings to large parties. They'd rather have one meaningful conversation than 10 superficial ones. They need alone time to recharge, which some people interpret as being antisocial or unfriendly. The pressure to conform to society's social expectations can be overwhelming for INFJs. They're constantly being told to put themselves out there, be more social, or stop being so quiet. But these suggestions ignore the fundamental differences in how INFJs process social energy and connection. 8. Career challenges. When society doesn't value what INFJs offer. The professional world can be particularly harsh for INFJs, and it's not because they lack talent or dedication. It's because society's definition of professional success often conflicts with INFJ strengths and values. In most workplaces, advancement depends heavily on self-promotion, political savvy, and aggressive pursuit of opportunities. INFJs, who prefer to let their work speak for itself and who value collaboration over competition, often find themselves at a disadvantage in this environment. They're the ones who will stay late to help a colleague meet a deadline, but they won't brag about it in the next team meeting. They're the ones who come up with innovative solutions to problems, but they won't take credit if the solution was built on someone else's initial idea. They're the ones who maintain team morale and help resolve conflicts, but these contributions are hard to quantify on a performance review. Society has created a professional culture that rewards the loudest voice in the room rather than the wisest one. INFJs, who prefer to think before speaking and who choose their words carefully, often find their contributions overlooked in favor of colleagues who are more comfortable with self-promotion. The emphasis on networking and relationship building for career advancement also puts INFJs at a disadvantage. While they're incredible at forming deep, meaningful professional relationships, they struggle with the superficial networking that's often required for career growth. Many INFJs end up in helping professions, counseling, social work, education, healthcare, where their natural empathy and desire to make a difference are valued. But even in these fields, they often face judgment for being too emotionally involved with their clients or students. The irony is that INFJs often make excellent leaders, but they rarely seek out leadership positions through traditional channels. They lead through influence and inspiration rather than authority and control. They're the leaders who actually care about their team members as people, not just as resources to be managed. 9. The authenticity paradox, being real in a fake world. Perhaps one of the most challenging aspects of being an INFJ in modern society is the pressure to be someone you're not. INFJs value authenticity above almost everything else, but society often rewards people who can adapt their personality to fit different situations. INFJs struggle with this chameleon-like behavior that seems to come naturally to others. They can't just put on a professional mask at work and become someone completely different. Their values, their empathy, their need for meaningful work, these things are core to who they are, and they can't just turn them off when it's convenient. But society interprets this authenticity as inflexibility or inability to adapt. When an INFJ can't engage in office politics or can't pretend to be enthusiastic about work that feels meaningless to them, they're labeled as difficult or unmotivated. The pressure to be fake for the sake of social or professional success can be incredibly damaging to INFJs. They'd rather struggle financially than compromise their integrity. They'd rather be alone than surround themselves with superficial relationships. They'd rather be misunderstood than pretend to be someone they're not. This commitment to authenticity often comes at a cost. INFJs may struggle more than others to find their place in the world because they refuse to compromise their core values for the sake of fitting in. They may take longer to find the right career path because they won't settle for work that doesn't align with their purpose. But society doesn't always appreciate this authenticity. Instead of recognizing it as a strength, it's often viewed as stubbornness or inability to be practical. INFJs are told to be realistic, compromise, or play the game. But for them, playing the game feels like betraying themselves. 10. Emotional intelligence versus society's emotional immaturity. Here's an uncomfortable truth. INFJs often possess a level of emotional intelligence that makes others uncomfortable. They can see through facades, understand hidden motivations, and pick up on emotions that people are trying to hide. And instead of appreciating this gift, society often responds with defensiveness and judgment. When an INFJ points out that someone seems upset or suggests that there might be underlying issues in a relationship or workplace situation, they're often accused of stirring up drama or reading too much into things. But more often than not, time proves them right. The problem is that many people aren't comfortable with this level of emotional awareness. They prefer to keep their feelings private, to maintain professional boundaries, to avoid dealing with messy human emotions. And INFJs, with their natural ability to see past these barriers, make people feel exposed and vulnerable. This creates a strange dynamic where society benefits from INFJ emotional intelligence. They're the ones people turn to for advice, support, and understanding, but also resents it. People want INFJs to be available when they need emotional support, but they don't want their emotions to be noticed or acknowledged at other times. INFJs are often the first to notice when someone is struggling, when a team is experiencing conflict, or when an organization's culture is becoming toxic. But when they try to address these issues, they're often told they're being too sensitive or creating problems where none exist. The reality is that most of society operates at a much lower level of emotional intelligence than INFJs. This isn't meant as an insult, it's just a fact. And when someone with high emotional intelligence tries to function in an environment with lower emotional intelligence, conflicts are inevitable. 11. The loneliness factor, misunderstood and isolated. Being constantly misunderstood and judged by society takes a real toll on INFJs, and one of the most significant impacts is profound loneliness. Not the kind of loneliness that comes from being physically alone. Many INFJs actually enjoy solitude. It's the deep, aching loneliness that comes from feeling like no one truly understands you. INFJs often describe feeling like they're living behind glass. They can see everyone else, and everyone else can see them, but there's this invisible barrier that prevents real connection. They're surrounded by people who don't understand their sensitivity, their intensity, their need for meaning, or their way of seeing the world. This loneliness is compounded by the fact that INFJs make up such a small percentage of the population. The chances of randomly encountering someone who truly gets you are pretty slim when you're part of less than 2% of people. And because society judges many INFJ traits as negative, INFJs often learn to hide their true selves, making genuine connection even more difficult. Many INFJs report feeling like outsiders looking in on a world they don't quite understand. They see everyone else seemingly navigating social situations with ease, advancing in their careers, forming casual friendships, and they wonder what's wrong with them that these things feel so difficult. The irony is that INFJs are often surrounded by people who care about them, but they don't feel truly seen or understood by those people. They may have family members who love them but constantly tell them they're too sensitive. They may have friends who enjoy their company but don't understand their need for deeper conversation. They may have colleagues who respect their work but find their approach too intense. This sense of isolation can lead to INFJs questioning themselves. Maybe everyone else is right. Maybe they are too sensitive, too intense, too weird. Maybe they should try harder to fit in, to be normal, to stop caring so much about things that others seem to handle with ease. 12. The strength hidden behind society's labels. Despite all the judgment and misunderstanding, there's something crucial that society often misses about INFJs: their incredible strength. The same qualities that society judges harshly are often the source of remarkable resilience and capability. That sensitivity that everyone complains about? It allows INFJs to pick up on subtle changes in people's moods and needs, making them incredible caregivers, friends, and partners. It helps them create art, music, and literature that touches people's souls. It enables them to spot problems early and address them before they become crises. That overthinking that people find so annoying? It's actually comprehensive analysis that leads to better decisions. INFJs are the ones who consider all the angles, think through potential consequences, and come up with solutions that take everyone's needs into account. That perfectionism that seems so neurotic to others? It drives INFJs to create work of exceptional quality. They're the ones who won't cut corners when it comes to safety, ethics, or excellence. They're the ones who push for better solutions instead of settling for good enough. That authenticity that makes others uncomfortable? It creates the foundation for genuine relationships and meaningful work. INFJs are the ones you can trust to be honest with you, even when it's difficult. They're the ones who will stand up for their values even when it's unpopular. The truth is, society needs INFJs. We need their empathy in a world that can be callous and cruel. We need their vision in a world that often focuses only on short-term gains. We need their authenticity in a world full of pretense and facades. We need their depth in a world that often stays stubbornly on the surface. But recognition of these strengths requires society to look beyond surface-level judgments and really understand what INFJs bring to the table. It requires valuing different approaches to life and work. It requires recognizing that diversity of thought and personality isn't just nice to have, it's essential for a healthy, functioning society. Conclusion: the raw truth about how INFJs are judged by society isn't pretty. They face constant criticism for traits that are actually strengths. They're told to change fundamental aspects of who they are to fit into a world that doesn't understand them. They're labeled as too sensitive, too intense, too weird, too much. But here's what I want every INFJ watching this to understand: the problem isn't with you. The problem is with a society that has created narrow definitions of acceptable behavior and then judges everyone who doesn't fit into those boxes. Your sensitivity isn't a weakness. It's a superpower that allows you to understand and help others in ways that most people can't. Your need for authenticity isn't stubbornness. It's integrity in a world that often rewards fakeness. Your deep thinking isn't overthinking. It's the kind of comprehensive analysis that prevents problems and creates better solutions. The world needs what you have to offer. It needs your empathy, your vision, your authenticity, your depth. Don't let society's judgments convince you to hide these gifts or try to become someone you're not. And for everyone else watching this, if you know an INFJ, take a moment to appreciate what they bring to your life. Their way of seeing the world might be different from yours, but that difference is valuable. Their sensitivity might seem overwhelming sometimes, but it's also what makes them such incredible friends and partners. Their intensity might be a lot to handle, but it's also what drives them to make real, meaningful contributions to the world. The goal isn't for INFJs to become more like everyone else. The goal is for society to become more accepting of different ways of being human. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to find our place in this world, and we all deserve to be understood and appreciated for who we truly are. Thanks for watching, and remember, being different isn't something to apologize for. It's something to celebrate.